We're going to look at loops in a little bit more detail now. I'm going to start off with a self-created loop, and to do this I'm going to create a blank region first. So I have a rock kit here, but I have no loops loaded at all. This is just my software instrument. So the first thing I'm going to do is hold down the command key. We have two of those, one either side of the space bar. When you hold the command key down and click in a space, it will create a blank region for you. There's nothing in here. If we double click on it, it'll open up the edit window, and we see here our matrix or our piano roll, depending on what you want to call it, and here are the notes for our drums. So what I'm going to do is zoom in on this, do some old-fashioned MIDI editing, and I'm going to have this grid displayed as 16th notes. Makes it easy to see. At the moment it's on 32nd notes, so there's the resolution of semiquavers or 16th notes, depending on which country you want to describe the notes. So I'm just going to put a kick on the first beat of the bar and turn it right up. I'm going to create another one on 2, 3 and 4, and it's the same way I've described earlier. I created that, changed its velocity, then I held down the option key and made copies of these. Makes it much easier, faster to create rhythms this way. And I'm going to create a hi-hat pattern the same way. And I'm just going to make copies of these. And I'm going to have these as loud, a little quieter, and then these two here, a little quieter. Then I'm going to make copies. And we can create patterns very, very quickly of our own, and we can then think about things like making this a little more interesting. And let's have a look at changing this a little bit. Delete notes, copy them, there we go again, and let's create one more of these. When you've created a rhythm of your own, you can add that to the loop library. So I'm going to do that now. Instead of it being called Rock Kit, I'm going to call it 01 JM Rock Kit. I can go through my descriptors if I want to. Genre, rock and blues. When I click create, that will be added to my loop browser library. So when I click on all drums, there it is. And then I can use that in any of my own other pieces. So creating your own loops is fairly straightforward. The next thing I want to do is talk about the loops being green and blue. The blue ones, as we know, are audio, and the green ones, when we drag them in, they will generate the MIDI instrument. Now, because a MIDI instrument or software instrument has to be loaded to play the MIDI data, the green ones take more CPU, require more CPU, that's central processing unit, power, so they're draining your resources. So if you change in your preferences here on your loops, you can actually force it so that when you drag your green loops in, they will then become converted purely into audio, like that. So this uses less CPU than having a software instrument loaded up. You can't edit them, of course, because they're not MIDI. But if you are finding that you want to, say, restrict your use to purely using audio, or your system is not coping with having lots of MIDI instruments, that's one way of doing it. So I'll just change that back and demonstrate it. I'll go straight back to making a MIDI instrument. You can see it's actually loading up the MIDI instrument, and it takes longer to do that. So for the next stage, looking at loops in detail, I'm going to look at trying to create more convincing sections of music using the loops. So this first example, I'm going to mute this little drum track. Actually, it doesn't matter, you can hear it with the drums for the moment, but I've just loaded up something called Cool Jazz Walking Bass 03, and it sounds like this. Okay, so you can get the idea. It just keeps playing the same bass line, and there's no sense of progression. After a while, it'll become quite tedious, because what would happen in a real jazz sequence is that the bass player would follow a chord sequence and adapt that bass line a little bit. So I'm not going to change the notes of the bass line, but I'm going to have a look at my master track. So master track is great. We've used it previously where we can do things like take the volume for the track down at the end, and all of the tracks will follow that volume curve and go quieter towards the end. But in terms of pitch, we can actually set this to follow a transposition. So let me just switch this on, and you'll see that here I've gone up +5 at that point, and back here I've gone back to 0. At this point I go up 7 semitones, that's 7 notes on a keyboard, and then I go down 5 here and back to home. So I'm using transpositions of 5 and 7, and this is what it sounds like. So I've got the feeling of a blues progression here. Just listening to this, I've realized that I could do something a little bit more convincing at this point. So we'll do this edit for real. Let's take this and copy it to there, and just make it one of these, and I'm going to take it right down to half of the bar, and then I'm going to copy it. Have a listen to what happens at this point. Just finish that off is this to be copied here and taken back to full length. It should work. Let's have a look at that. Let's try it again. That's a convincing blues progression using this loop, little copies of parts of it, and you need no musical knowledge other than to know that I'm transposing it at 5, 7, 5 and 0. 0 is home as far as we can think of.